to agree what the 100 million for delayed discharge is going to deliver in terms of the integrated partnerships, what they are going to deliver in terms of those national indicators of the 72-hour discharge standard, keeping people out of hospital, getting people. So that's a huge agenda. So the same people, I guess, within COSLA who have been working on all of that have also been looking at the fairer charging issue. So I think, to be fair to them, they have had a lot on their plate around this whole agenda and have been trying to keep all these balls in the air and make progress on all of them. And whereas I can understand the frustration that people might feel that pace has been too slow, a lot of these issues are very, very complex and have required us to have very detailed discussions around each aspect of them. And I think that's perhaps by way of explanation maybe why it's been a bit slower than people would have liked.
Quick supplementary in the back of that. Is consistency ultimately achievable? In their evidence, Argyll and Bute, for example, suggest that the geography of the council area is such that it will always be difficult to achieve a degree of consistency that some might regard as reasonable, depending on how easily they are able to access services elsewhere. Is that an insurmountable obstacle, or do you believe that that concern they have about the breadth of the council area they have to represent is something that could be overcome?
I think there will always be differences around, perhaps around the edges, because if you look at the requirement for travel, if you look at the requirement, a whole host of challenges of delivering services and being able to actually access services in a remote and rural area is a different challenge from that in an urban environment. However, I think where the financial assessment framework is helpful is that some things are about, well, what's disregarded as income in one local authority? Why is it not disregarded in another? So if you move from one local authority to another, the differences of what is charged for or what is disregarded in the financial assessment are very, very varied. And I think that's where COSLA had really accepted that variation was too large. So if we can get those big inconsistencies marshalled into a better place of more consistency on things like what is disregarded, not disregarded, then the differences are more about the things like rurality and the nature of the local authority area, rather than a decision about what is disregarded on someone's income and not disregarded. So I think we will get to a better place, I think, through the financial assessment framework. Whether that eradicates every difference, it probably won't, but I think it will be a much fairer financial assessment than we have at the moment. But we obviously will want to look at that very closely as it emerges from approval from through COSLA structures.
Kenny?
There's been a specific concern raised by Inclusion Scotland and a more general caveat and warning put forward by the Equality and Human Rights Commission regarding compliability with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities, in particular Article 19. Can you tell us whether the Scottish Government thinks that you're compliant, and indeed what work's done to ensure that you are compliant?
Yeah, well, we've looked at the evidence provided to the committee on this today, and we don't consider that the general charging framework is incompatible with the acts and conventions highlighted. I mean, obviously, we would keep that under review in the light of any further evidence that comes forward. Obviously, we also have to make sure that anything is consistent with equality legislation, and we've done that. However, that doesn't mean that there's not improvements that can be made on the fairness. It may not be incompatible with all of those, whether it's the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities or whatever. But that doesn't mean it can't. There's not scope to improve the fairness of it, and that's where we're focusing our attention at the moment.
Yeah.
I suppose and that would, you've said under the equality impact assessments, you would have take the same view, that you've had a look at that. And
yes, the Equality Act itself has, as you're probably aware, a general duty and a specific duty on local authorities, both of which are relevant to the development of charging policies. So it requires you to look at that having a policy that looks to eliminate discrimination, harassment, victimisation, advance equality of opportunity, promote good relations between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not share it. So the COSLA's charging guidance states that as a result of the general duty, local authorities must consider how to promote equality, ensure that no group are put at a disadvantage by their charging policy, and that local authorities should carry out equality impact assessments on their non-residential care charging policy to make sure that there's not a disproportionate impact on people with a protected characteristic. So they have to do all of that. I guess that's more thinking about if the policy was fairer to one section of the community rather than another, in terms of one group over another. And I guess whether people feel that the existing charging policies are fair or not, I don't think they penalise necessarily one group over another. It's just that perhaps one local authority has a different charging policy than another local authority, rather than differing policy within that local authority, if you see what I mean. However, having said all of that, I think what I've said throughout this evidence session is that that doesn't mean that there can't be more done to make it fairer. So there's one thing being requirements under the law. It's quite another thing about whether or not something can be made fairer, and I think that's the territory that we're on.
Can I conclude on that issue of fairness? Ian Hood, the Scotland coordinator of the Learning Disability Allowance, I thought made a very forceful and reasoned contribution to our discussion in relation to what has changed in recent times. And that is that the income tax allowance has increased significantly. And whereas councils were able to charge at about 6,000 or 8,000 for over 65-year-olds, and that level used to be consistent with the income tax threshold, income tax threshold is now 10,000 and is set to go higher. So there are individuals who are no longer regarded as being subject to income tax, but who, because this threshold for charging hasn't increased, find that they are regarded as being capable of meeting charging costs. And I just wonder, en route to abolition as a principle, which I think we touched on earlier, whether that issue of fairness is rather exposed by that discrepancy which has arisen over the period even that this review has been underway, and whether that might not be a route at least to try and alleviate those who are least able to afford the charging.
These are some of the discussions that we're having with COSLA around, looking at the issue of inequalities and those who are on the lower incomes, and how we could do more around making it fairer from that perspective. You'll forgive me for maybe not getting into too much of the detail, but I think there is a recognition that those who are on the lowest incomes is an area that we probably need to do more about.
I will take comfort from that.
Any further questions? Okay, is there no further questions? Will the committee agree that we reflect on the evidence heard and consider a paper by the clerk at the next meeting before deciding what action to take?
Agreed.
Agreed. And can I thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for attending, and now allow you to go.
Okay, thanks very much, Convener.
Thank you very much. Could we suspend for a couple of minutes? I believe there's a number of petitioners from the Mesham plant waiting to come in, so we'll suspend for a couple of minutes.